The bells of St. Brannock had been ringing for 11 minutes. Thomasin counted them the way her father had taught her to count anything that would not stop, in sets of 10 under the breath, so that the number stayed honest. The church smelled of cold stone and beeswax and the salt that came in on everything in Wexholt. Her mother had made the gown out of 2 older ones, and the seam at the left shoulder pulled when she raised her arm, so she did not raise it. She stood in the porch with her hands folded and looked at the door. Beyond the door, the road ran down to the Grindle, the flat gray causeway that carried the parish over the mud when the water allowed it, and drowned quietly twice a day when it did not. She had crossed it that morning with her boots in her hand and her stockings in her boots. Low water had been at 9. She knew that without thinking, the way other women knew the words of hymns. She was 23 years old. She was to be married at 11. Then the bells stopped. Nobody had told them to stop. That was the first wrong thing. Osric Pye had rung the bells of that church for 40 years, and he did not stop until the bride was through the door, and the bride was not through the door, and the ropes had gone still anyway. Thomasin heard the sound the silence made. It was not nothing. It was 80 people in a stone building, all deciding at once not to speak. The curate came out to her. He was a young man with a wet mouth, and he could not look at her face, so he looked at her shoulder. "There is a boy come up from the Danbury house," he said. "Then let him come." The boy was perhaps 12, and he had run the whole way, and he held the paper out at arm's length as though it were hot. Thomasin took it. She read it standing in the porch with the light behind her. It was 4 lines long. It was not signed with anything more than an initial. She read it twice. She folded it along the crease it already had. She put it into the pocket of the made-over gown, where her father's brass compass lay against her hip, cold through the cloth, as it had lain every day for 6 years. "Is he gone to Bristol?" she said. The boy nodded. "In the night, miss. With the trunks. Thank you. Go and eat something." She stood a moment behind her. In the church, the silence had begun to come apart into whispering. She could hear her own name in it. She would hear it in that shape for a long time, she thought, in shops and lanes and doorways, and there was nothing whatever to be done about that today. Her mother was at her elbow. Honora Lark was a small woman who had buried a husband and 2 sons, and who had learned to go very quiet when things broke. "Come away," her mother said. "Come out the side door and I will take you home." And Thomasin would have. She had already turned her body toward the side door. That was the truth of it, and she never pretended otherwise afterward. She had turned to go. What stopped her was the wind. It came in through the porch and lifted the loose hair at her neck, and it came from the south and west, and it had been northerly at first light. She had watched it at first light. She had stood in the yard with the compass in her hand at 6:30, because her father had done it every morning of his working life, and because doing it had made her feel less like a woman about to be married. A spring tide, low water at 9, the wind backed into the southwest and freshening, and the whole gray plate of the estuary waiting behind it. Thomasin stood in the porch of St. Brannock, and she did the sum her father had taught her, and the sum came out wrong, and she did it again, and it came out wrong the same way. The Grindle would close in 40 minutes, not 2 hours. 40 minutes. And every soul in that church, every farmer and fisherman and hired girl and old woman who had put on her one good bonnet to watch Thomasin Lark be married, had come by the low road. She turned around. She walked back up the aisle. She walked up it alone, in the gown, past every face, and she did not hurry, and she did not look down, and the whispering stopped ahead of her, the way birds go quiet ahead of a hawk. At the step she turned to face them. "The wind has backed," she said. "The Grendel will be under in 40 minutes. If you go now by the high road, you will be dry. If you go by the low road, you will not." Nobody moved. She understood why. They were waiting to see her weep. They had come for a wedding, and been given something better to talk about. And a woman who had just been left standing did not tell 80 people what to do. "Mr. Pye," she said, Osric Pye stood up in the fifth pew. He was 71 and his hands shook, and he had known her father. "She has the right of it," he said. "Ambrose Lark's girl has the right of it. Move." They moved. She got them out. She stood at the porch and she counted them out in sets of 10 under her breath, so the number stayed honest. And she sent the carts up the high road, and she put the old women in the carts, and she sent the Willoughby children with the pies because their mother had gone ahead. The curate wrung his hands and asked what he should do, and she told him to carry the flowers. He carried the flowers. The last cart went over the grindle with the water already turning white at the edges of the stone. Then she walked down and stood on the causeway herself, in the ruined shoes, and let it come over her feet. It was very cold. It came up over the leather and then over her ankles. 80. She had counted 80 out and 80 across. The number was honest. She went back up to the church because there was nowhere else to go, and because her mother had gone with the pies and would be halfway to Wexholt by now, and because a person has to be somewhere. The building was empty, and it was very loud with emptiness. Somebody had left a hat. The flowers were gone off the sill where the curate had taken them, and there were 4 wet rings on the stone where the jars had stood. Thomasin walked up the aisle for the 3rd time that morning. She thought that she would probably never come into this church again without doing this walk in her head, and then she thought that she would come into it every Sunday for the rest of her life, because it was the only church there was. She took the ring out of her glove. It was her mother's ring, not Danbury's, because Danbury had never sent one. She had not thought about that until this moment. In 14 months, he had never once sent her a ring, and she had explained it to herself. And now the explanation lay in pieces in front of her, and she looked at it without much surprise. She put the ring in her pocket beside the compass. Then she saw that she was not alone. A man was sitting in the last pew on the aisle, quite still, with his hat on the seat beside him. He had not gone out with the others. He had not gone out at all. He was watching her the way a man watches weather, that he cannot do anything about. She did not know him. That was the thing she was most sure of. Wexholt had 400 people in it, and she knew every face, and she did not know this one. He stood when she looked at him. He did not come toward her. "You will want the church to yourself," he said. "I will go. I have kept a horse waiting an hour already, and it is a better animal than I deserve." His voice was low, and it was not a Wexholt voice. "Who are you?" she said. He did not answer that. He looked at her feet instead, at the wet shoes and the hem of the gown gone dark to the knee, and something happened in his face and did not finish happening. 40 minutes, he said. "How did you know it was 40? Because I know the water." "No. Anyone here knows the water. How did you know it was 40 and not an hour?" Thomasin looked at him. She was very tired, and her feet were numb, and she had been left at the altar of this church a little over an hour ago, and she found that she did not have anything left over for politeness. "Because the wind backed 4 points between 6 and 11, she said, "and because low water was at 9, and because it is 3 days past the new moon. Does that satisfy you?" He was quiet. "Yes," he said. Then he picked up his hat, and he took something out of it, and he set that thing down on the seat of the pew where he had been sitting. It was a packet of papers folded in oiled cloth and tied with a black tape, and it was old, and it had been carried a long way. "This was not a day to bring you that," he said. "I chose today because I believed you would be married and safe, and that it would cost you nothing to hear it. I was wrong about the day. I have been wrong about a great many things, and I have been slower about them than a man ought to be. It is yours. Open it or burn it." He walked out. She stood where she was for a moment. Then she went down to the pew and picked the packet up and turned it over, and on the outside of the oiled cloth, in ink gone brown, was written a name: Ambrose Lark, Esquire, land agent. Wen Head, her father, 6 years dead. Thomasin went to the door, with the packet in her hands. He was already at the lich gate. There was a groom holding a tall gray horse. and there was a carriage further down with 2 more men beside it, and none of it was a thing that belonged in Wexholt on a Tuesday. Osric Pye was standing at the gate, with his cap in his fists, watching them go. "Mr. Pye," Thomason said, "who was that?" The old man did not turn round. "On the harness," he said. "Did you not see the harness girl? A heron and a key?" She had seen it. She had looked straight at it, and it had meant nothing at all, and now it meant everything, because she had grown up with that mark burned into the ends of the fence posts on every field her father ever walked. "Say it," she said. Osric Pye said at Calvern. The cottage at Wexholt had 2 rooms down and 1 up, and it had been meant for a fisherman, and it had been the whole of the world to Thomasin Lark since she was 17 years old. She came into it at dusk, in a wet gown, with a dead man's name in her hands. Her mother was by the fire. Her mother did not ask about Danbury. That was the kindest thing anybody did for her that day, and she never forgot it. "There is broth," Honora said. "In a moment." Thomasin put the packet on the table. She sat down in front of it, and she did not touch it again. She thought about Wenhead. It had been a good house to be a child in. Her father had been land agent to the Calvern estate for 19 years, which meant that he walked the fields and set the rents and argued with the surveyors, and knew every gate and drain and ditch on 11,000 acres. He had a small office with a window that looked north over the marsh, and a long desk, and on the desk a brass compass and a wooden cradle, and he had taught her to use it before she could read properly. "Count in sets of 10, he told her. "Under your breath. That way you cannot fool yourself, and a man who cannot fool himself cannot be fooled by anybody else." Then there was the sea wall. It was to be built along the low ground at Barrow Sands, and it was to cost a great deal of money. And the money went through the agent's book, because everything went through the agent's book. In the spring of the year that Thomasin turned 17, an auditor came down from London and sat in her father's office for 4 days. And at the end of the 4 days there was a sum of £1,100 that could not be accounted for. Ambrose Lark could not explain it. He said he had not taken it. He said the entries were not in his hand and he could prove it. And then he went to fetch the book that would prove it. And the book was not where he had left it, and it was never found at all. He was dismissed in June. Not prosecuted. That was the mercy, and it was the worst thing they did to him, because a man who is not tried is never acquitted, either. He came home to Wexholt, and he lived 9 months, and then he died in the March of a thing the doctor called a weakness of the heart, and Thomasin had her own name for it, and she kept it to herself. In the April after he died, a man came from the estate. He was polite, and he had a leather case, and he explained that His Grace the Duke of Calvern wished the widow of a long-serving servant to be provided for, and there was a sum, and there would be a small annual payment, and it required only a signature on a paper that said the family made no claim upon the estate, and would raise no question about the accounts at Wenhead, then or afterward, forever. Honora Lark had her hand halfway to the pen. Thomasin, who was 17, said no. She said it once, and she said it quietly, and she said it in front of the man with the leather case. She said that her mother would not be paid to be quiet about her husband, because being quiet about him was the same as agreeing with them, and that they would rather be poor than agree. The man went away. The money went with him. Her mother did not speak to her for a fortnight. Then she spoke to her, and they never discussed it again, and they lived 6 years on mending and on gutting fish for the pie boats and on a 1/4 acre potatoes, and every single one of those years Thomasin had known exactly what her refusal had cost, down to the shilling, because she was her father's daughter and she counted things. She had written one letter. She wrote it the week after the man with the leather case left. She wrote it to the Duke of Calvern himself, 6 pages, and she said things in it that a girl of 17 has no business saying to a duke. No answer ever came. 6 years. No answer. And now the man had sat at the back of her wedding with his hat in his lap and had put her father's name on a pew. "Thomasin," her mother said, "you will have to open it, not tonight. She got up and she put the packet on the high shelf, behind the flour crock, where it could not be seen from the door, and she ate the broth, and she slept badly. At first light there was a knock. It was not a servant. That was the first thing she understood, standing in the doorway with her hair down her back and her father's coat over her shift, because a duke sends a servant, and there was no servant. He had come alone, and he had come on the gray horse, and his boots were filthy to the knee. The grindle had uncovered less than an hour before. He had waited on the far side for the water to go in the dark, and he had crossed the moment it was possible. "Miss Lark, you will have got out of bed very early to do this," she said. "I did not go to bed." Behind her, her mother rose from the fire and made a sound and put her hand on the back of the chair. The Duke of Calvern looked past Thomasin into the room and saw a small woman in an apron holding onto a chair with both hands, and he took his hat off and he stayed where he was on the step. "Mistress Lark," he said, "I will not come in unless you ask me to. If you would rather I stood in the lane and set it from there, I will do that instead, and you may shut the door on me at any moment you like." Honora looked at him a long time. "Come in," she said. "Mind the beam." There were 2 chairs in that room. Honora took one. Thomasin took the other because she would not stand while he sat, so he did not sit at all. He stood the whole time with his hat in his hand, under a beam that was 6 inches too low for him, and he did not once remark upon it. Honora Lark got up and filled the kettle. "Mother," Thomasin said. "He has ridden in the dark," her mother said. "And he has crossed the grindle on the turn, and whatever else he is a man standing in my house at 6 in the morning." So there was tea. It was the tea they kept for illness and for the parson, and it was weak because the leaves had been used once already, and it came in a cup with a mended handle and a piece gone out of the rim. The Duke of Calvern took the cup. He turned it in his hand so that the broken part came to his own mouth and not toward the room, and he drank it, and he thanked her, and he set it down on the sill because there was no table free. Thomasin watched him do it. She had spent 6 years hating a house and everybody in it, and she had built the man at the top of that house very carefully in her mind, out of a stranger with a leather case and a letter that was never answered. The thing she had built did not turn a cup in its hand. It made her angrier rather than less. She could not have said why. "I have read the letter you wrote me," he said. Thomasin's hands went still in her lap. "You did not answer it." "No?" 6 years. "I read it the week it came," he said. "I was 26 years old, and I had held the title 14 months, and I had been handed an estate and a mother in her last illness, and 11,000 acres I had never walked. Your letter was put in front of me by my steward with an account of the matter attached to it, and the account was very complete and very reasonable, and it said that the daughter of a dismissed agent was distressed and was making accusations, and that a reply would encourage her. I did not reply. I did not read it a second time. I did what I was told was correct, and I put it in a drawer, and I let 6 years pass over it. Why are you here? Because in March, I read it again." He turned the hat over once in his hands. It was the only restless thing about him. "There is a bridge at Barrow Sands," he said. "That has been wrong since the day it was built. I went out to look at it myself in March, because I have got tired of being told things. And standing on it, I could see that the whole line of the wall runs the best part of 110 yards inside where it ought to run, and that whoever set it out was working from a survey that had been altered, and that the alteration is worth a great deal of money to a man who owned the ground the wall was moved off. So I came home, and I sent for the accounts of the year. The wall was built, and they were not complete, and I sent for the agent's daybook, and I was told it had been lost in your father's time. It was lost in his hands," Thomasin said. "That is what they said. That is exactly what they said. I know what they said. I have spent since March finding out what is true." Honora had not moved at all. "It took me 6 weeks," the Duke said. "It was not difficult. It had simply never been done. because the man who would have had to do it was the man who profited by nobody doing it. There is a copy of the original survey lodged at Taunton with the Commissioners of Sewers, and it does not match the survey at Wen Head, and the difference is in the hand of somebody who was not your father, and I have the two of them together. And I have a receipt for £1,100 paid in the November of that year to a name that is not your father's name." He stopped. "Say it plainly," Thomason said. "You have not said it plainly." "Your father did not steal from me," said the Duke of Calvern. "He was robbed, and I let it be done in my name, and I dismissed him for it, and he died of it. That is what I came to St. Brannock to say." Honora Lark put her apron over her face. She did not sob. She made no noise. Quote, "She sat in the chair by the fire with the apron over her face, and her shoulders went down and stayed down, and Thomason got up and knelt beside her and held her, and the Duke turned and faced the wall and looked at the wall and gave them the room." He did not speak until Honora took the apron away. "Then who?" Thomason said. "I will not tell you today. You will tell me now. I have a receipt with a name on it," he said. "I have a survey in hand I do not yet have proof of. What I do not have is a magistrate's certainty, and if I give you the name today, you will go up that lane with it before the tide turns, and you will say it in front of witnesses, and the moment you do, every paper I still need will go into a fire. I have watched a book disappear once already. That is not your reason." He looked at her. It was the first time either of them had done that properly, and it lasted rather too long, and neither of them looked away. "No," he said, "it is not the whole of it." "Then what? Because of who it will hurt?" said the Duke, "and because until yesterday morning I believed you were about to marry into it." The fire cracked. Somewhere out on the flats, a curlew went over, making the sound they make, which is the loneliest sound in England. Thomason stood up off her knees. "Danbury," she said. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it either, and a man who will not lie has no third thing to do, so he said nothing at all, and the nothing was an answer. She found that she was not surprised, and she was ashamed of that, because it meant that some part of her had known something for 14 months and had chosen not to look at it. "You will want to make this right," she said. "That is why you did not sleep. You will have worked out what it is worth. 6 years of a land agent's salary, and something for the manor of it, and something for my mother. You will have a figure. Men like you always come with a figure. I have a figure. Do not say it. Is owed not in this room." She turned round from the window. "You came into a church yesterday and found a woman standing in a wet gown with nothing left of her name, and you gave her back her father. That is the largest thing anybody has ever done for me. Put a price beside it, and I will never again be able to think of the one without thinking of the other. We refused your money once when we were starving. We will refuse it now that we are only poor. And if you make my mother choose again at her age, I will not forgive you." The Duke of Calvern stood under the low beam and turned the hat once in his hands. "Then I have nothing to offer you," he said, "and I find that I dislike it very much. You have something." She put her hand into the pocket of her father's coat and took out the brass compass. It was small and it was heavy for its size, and the lid did not sit true anymore, because a girl of 17 had once thrown it at a wall. She crossed the room and held it out. That stood on his desk at Wen Head for 19 years. I took it the day they put him out, and I have carried it every day since, and I have hated every man in that house with it, in my pocket. Take it back, put it where it stood. And when you have your certainty, you will say his name out loud in the place where they said it wrongly, in front of the same men, and you will not soften it, and you will not do it by letter." He took it. His hand was under hers for a moment, and then it was not. "I will bring it back to you," he said. "I did not give it to you to bring back." "No," he said, "you did not." He put his hat on at the door. because the beam made anything else absurd. He thanked her mother by name. He went out, and they heard the gray horse go down the lane, and then they did not hear it any more. Thomasin stood in the middle of the room. Then she sat down on the floor beside the hearth, quite slowly, in her father's coat, and she began to shake. It started in her hands and went up her arms and into her jaw, and it would not stop for anything. There was no reason for it. Nobody had died. It was an ordinary Wednesday. Her mother came and sat down on the floor beside her, which she had not done in 20 years, and which her knees would punish her for, and put a blanket round them both, and did not say one word. They stayed there until the shaking stopped. The letter came 12 days later. It was not on heavy paper, and it did not smell of anything, and it had no crest on it at all, and Thomasin thought afterward that this had been deliberate, because a man who had been told once that money spoils a gift would think about what else spoils one. Miss Lark, in the loft above the estate office at Wen Head, there are 2 chests of your father's rough field books going back 19 years. They were put up there when he left, and nobody has taken them down. I have had them brought into the office. I have looked at them, and I cannot read them. Neither can my present steward, nor the clerk at Taunton, nor a man from the commissioners of sewers who spent an afternoon at it and told me it was a private shorthand, and that in his opinion the only person who ever read it was the man who wrote it. I believe that is not quite true. I am asking you to come and read them. I will pay you what I pay a clerk, which is 2 shillings and 6 the day, and I will pay it whether the books prove anything or nothing. You would work in the office, and you would go home at 4, so as to have the tide. You would not be required to see me. If you would rather not, send no answer, and I will not write again. Calvern. Her mother read it twice and put it down on the table between them. You will go, Honora said. I have not said so. You have been standing there with your thumb over his name so you would not have to look at it, and you have read it 4 times. You will go. Thomasin went to the window. The tide was 2 hours off the top, and the grindle was already gone under, and the gulls were sitting out on the water in a long, untidy line. He is not asking me for anything, she said. That is the trouble with it. Yes. If he had asked me for something, I could have refused it. Yes, her mother said. I expect he knows that, she went on the Monday. Wen Head sat a mile back from the estuary at the end of an avenue of limes that her father had planted the year she was born, and she had not been up that avenue since she was 17 years old. The trees had got very large. That was the thing that undid her, more than the house did. The trees had gone on growing the whole time. The house itself was pale, stone, and it was long rather than tall, and it had 40 windows on the front, and she had counted them twice as a child and got a different answer both times. She was not taken to the front door. She was taken round to the yard door, which was correct, and which she was glad of, because the front door would have finished her. A woman was waiting in the passage. She was perhaps 60, and she was broad, and she had flour on her wrists. Thomasin Lark, she said. Mr. Skell, Damaris will do. It did before. The housekeeper looked at her for a while without any hurry at all. You have got his chin. You always did have. Your father had a chin on him like the end of a boat. Thomasin did not trust herself to answer that. He used to whistle in this passage, Damaris Kell said badly, and out of tune, and I told him off for it 40 times if I told him once, and I have missed it every day for 6 years, and there is nobody in this house I have been able to say that to. So I have said it to you. Come on. The office is where it was. The office was where it was. The north window still looked over the marsh. The long desk was still under it. The floor still had the pale patch by the fire, where a rug had lain and been taken away, and the shelf still had the gap in it where a ledger of 1,100 pounds ought to have stood. And in the middle of the desk, in its wooden cradle, sitting square to the edge, the way he had always said it, was her father's brass compass. The lid still did not sit true. Nobody had mended it. Somebody had simply cleaned it and put it where it stood. Thomason held on to the back of the chair for a moment. Then she took off her bonnet and hung it on the nail that was still in the wall. Because the nail was still in the wall, and she sat down in her father's chair and opened the first of the field books. It took her 10 minutes to get her eye in. The shorthand was not a code. It was worse than a code, because it was the private laziness of a man who wrote fast in the rain, and it had no rules at all, only habits. He used a hooked mark for a ditch and a doubled one for a drain. He never wrote north. He drew it. He wrote numbers of feet as tallies when he was hurried and as figures when he was not. And Thomason knew which was which because she knew what his hand looked like when he was cold. By noon, she was reading it as easily as a newspaper, and she was crying steadily and quietly the whole time. And she did not stop working, because he would not have. She went home at 4 for the tide. She came back the next day and the day after. She did not see the Duke of Calvern at all that first week. He was at Taunton, or he was riding, or he was somewhere in that long house behind the 40 windows. Twice she found things on the desk that had not been there when she left. A better lamp, a second inkstand because she had been sharing his, a pair of woolen mittens with the fingers cut off them, which was the most useful thing anybody had given her in her life, because the office had a north window, and no fire lit until midday, and she had not mentioned it to a living soul. On the 9th day she came to the last of the books. It was the one for the year of the sea-wall, and it was thinner than the others, and it stopped on a Tuesday in the April, 3 days before the auditor came down from London. The last entry was in her father's hand, and it was steadier than his usual, which meant he had written it sitting down and indoors and slowly, which he almost never did. Went to Barrow Sands with the new line and stood it against the old. It is moved. It is moved by 110 yards, and the ground it is moved off is not the estate ground. I have asked at Taunton for the lodged copy. If anything is found wanting in the wall account before that copy comes to me, then it will have been made to be found, and the man who made it is, the page ended there. The next page had been cut out of the book with a knife, close into the stitching, so neatly that she had turned 4 leaves past it before she understood what she was looking at. She was still sitting there when the light went orange on the marsh and the tide was long past turning, and she had missed the grindle entirely. The door opened behind her. "Damaris tells me you have not eaten," the Duke of Calvern said, "and Pye has been sent word that you are at Ven Head and are not drowned, and your mother knows, and there is a room made up, and I am aware that you did not ask for any of that, and I have done it anyway. You may be angry about it after you have eaten." Thomason turned the book round on the desk and pushed it across to him. He read it, standing. He read it twice. She watched his jaw. "Cut out," he said, "with a knife. In this house. In this room, probably, because the loft is where the chest went and the chest went up sealed." "Yes, he knew," Thomason said. "That is what I have been sitting here with. He knew a week before it happened." He wrote it down because he was frightened, and because writing things down was the only way he had ever known to be safe, and he put it in a book on a shelf in a house full of men who were robbing him. And then he waited for the copy to come from Taunton, and it never came. "It never came," said the Duke. "It was sent. I have the clerk's record of the sending. It went into a bag that came here." She put her hands flat on the desk. "Then I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it the way you have answered everything else, which is badly and completely. Ask, after you did not answer my letter in the 6 years, did you ever see him?" The Duke of Calvern did not move for a moment. Then he came round and sat down on the edge of the windowsill, so that he was lower than she was, and put his hands on his knees. "Once," he said. "Where? Taunton." The September after he was put out, outside the Corn Exchange. He was on the far pavement with a paper parcel under his arm, and he had got thin in a way I did not recognize at first, and he saw me, and he began to cross the road. And "And I turned and went into the exchange," said the Duke, "and I stood inside the door where he could not see me, and I waited until he had gone by." The office was very quiet. "I have told nobody that," he said. "Not the magistrate, not my aunt, not my own steward. It is not evidence, and it is not useful, and it does not help you, and I have carried it up and down this house for 6 years, and I have never once said it out loud, and now I have said it to his daughter, in his room, and I find that is exactly as bad as I always expected it to be." Thomasin found that her hands were shaking again, and she put them in her lap. "Why did you," she said, "turn away?" "Because I was 26 years old, and I had been told the thing that made my life simple, and he was going to come across the road and make it complicated, and I did not want it complicated. That is all it was. It was not cruelty. Cruelty would have been better. Cruelty at least takes an interest." He looked out of the north window, at the marsh. "There is something I am going to say to you now," he said, "and then I am going to go and let you eat. Say it. You will be talked about. You are being talked about already." A woman who was left standing at St. Brannock in front of 80 people, and who was now paid 2 shillings and 6 the day to sit in a room in my house, is the best thing that has happened to this parish in 20 years, and I have no power whatever to stop it, and neither have you. I know that. "There is a thing that people will decide," the Duke said. "They will decide it whatever the truth is. And when the name of Ambrose Lark is cleared, as it will be, they will look for the reason, and if there is any question at all about you and me, they will find that reason, and it will not be the survey, and it will not be the receipt. It will be you. They will say the papers were arranged between us. And the one thing I have to give your father back is the only thing I can give him, which is that nobody in England is able to say his name was cleared for any reason except that it was true." Thomasin sat very still. "So," he said, "I am giving you my word about something, and I would like you to hold me to it, and I would like it written on your side of the account and not mine. I will never make you an offer of any kind. Not a settlement, not a place, not a position, and not myself. Not this year, and not in 10 years. If I ever offered you anything at all, it could not be told apart from payment, because you have already refused payment in front of me, and I know exactly what it cost you. So I will not, you have my word. And if I asked you for something, that is different," he said. "That is entirely different, and you know it is, and you will not ask, so it is safe to say." Thomasin looked at him. "That is a very convenient word you have given me," she said. "It is. You have made yourself unable to do the one thing anybody would talk about, which means you may go on doing every other thing exactly as you please, and nobody can accuse you of anything at all because you have a word out. It costs you nothing, and it puts the whole of it on me, because now it is I who must either come up that avenue or not, and whichever I do, I shall have chosen it alone." The Duke of Calvern considered that for a good deal longer than she expected. "About half of that is fair," he said, "and I have thought about it for 3 weeks, and I have not found the way round it. It is convenient. It is also true. Both things at once. Most of the decent things I have done in my life have had something convenient sitting in the middle of them, and I have given up pretending they had not, because pretending is precisely what put a man out of this office. That is an unusual thing for a duke to say. It has been an unusual year," he said, "and I would rather you thought me self-serving and honest than the other arrangement which I have had a great deal of practice at, and am very tired of." He stood up off the sill. "May I ask you one thing? Before I go?" "Yes. Why did you truly refuse the money? At 17. Not the reason you gave the man with the case. The other one." Thomasin looked at her father's handwriting on the desk in front of her. "There were 6 men at his funeral from this estate," she said. "They came down from the house, and they stood at the top of the lane by the yew, and they did not come down to the grave. I watched them the whole time. I was 17, and I stood by the hole in the ground with my mother, and I watched 6 men stand at the top of a lane for 40 minutes. And in the April, the man came with the leather case and the money, and I understood what money was for. It is what you send down the lane instead of coming down it yourself. That is all it has ever been in my life, so I would not have it. The Duke of Calvern stood in the middle of her father's office with his hands at his sides. "Thank you," he said, Ansel. She had not meant to. It came out of her without any permission at all, and it hung there in the cold north room, and he stopped in the doorway with his back to her, and he did not turn round, and he did not answer. He simply stood there for a moment in the dark of the passage, and then he went away down it, and Thomasin sat in her father's chair and listened to the sound of a man walking slowly, who could perfectly well have walked fast. So began the summer. She came 3 days in the week, and then 4. She was paid 2 shillings and 6pence, and she took it, because she had refused a settlement. A clerk's wage is not a settlement, and because there is a great difference between money given and money earned, and she had thought about it for 1 whole night before she decided so. She made a fair copy of every field book in a plain hand that a magistrate could read. It came to 600 pages. They fell into the habit of the office at 4, when she was stopping and he was coming in off the land. He would ask what she had found. She would tell him. He was, she discovered, extremely stupid about drainage and knew it, and asked questions like a man who did not mind being thought a fool, which she had never before seen a gentleman do. She tried to teach him the shorthand. He was hopeless at it. He could not tell her father's cold hand from his warm one, and he never learned the hooked mark for a ditch, and one afternoon he got it so wrong that she laughed out loud, entirely without meaning to, for the first time since April, and then stopped as though she had dropped something. He did not remark on it. He was very good at not remarking on things. In July, they walked the line at Barrow Sands together in the rain with the engineer from Bridgewater, who was a busy man and did not want a woman there. Thomasin stood in the wet with her father's tally in her hand and told him the wall was set 110 yards inside the lodged line, and he told her she was mistaken, and they measured it, and it was 111. The engineer took his hat off to her at the end of it. He did it in front of 11 men. That was the day the talking properly began. She had known it would. She had known since the Duke had stood in that office and told her plainly. But knowing a thing is not the same as coming into your own kitchen on a Saturday and finding your mother sitting with her hands in her lap and nothing on the fire. "Mistress Wenlock has been," Honora said. She wished to be sure I had heard. "Heard what?" "That you dine at Ven Head." "I have never dined at Ven Head in my life. I have eaten bread and cheese in an office standing up, twice." "I know that," her mother said. "I told her that." She said well, and she said it in the way they say it. Honora looked at the cold grate. "Thomasin, I am not asking you to stop. I will never ask you that. I only want to say it once so that it has been said. You have got one thing back for us. Do not put it down in the road to pick up something else." Thomasin did not sleep much that night. She was still turning it over on the Monday when she came up the avenue of limes and saw that there was a traveling carriage standing in the yard at Wen Head, with the horses being taken out of it, and 4 trunks down on the cobbles, and Damaris Kell coming toward her fast across the yard with her apron twisted up in one hand. "His aunt," Damaris said. "Lady Sabra come from London and not expected, and she has asked for you by name before she has taken her bonnet off." The winter parlor at Wen Head faced south and got the sun all afternoon, and it was the warmest room in the house, and Thomasin had never been in it. Lady Sabra Ferrers was 70 years old. She was upright and dry, and beautifully dressed in gray, and she had her nephew's eyes exactly, except that his rested on things and hers arrived at them. She did not get up. "Miss Lark, sit." Thomasin sat, because standing would have been a performance, and she had not come to perform. "You take tea, thank you." Lady Sabra poured it herself, and her hand was perfectly steady, and she talked while she poured, in the way of a woman who has decided the shape of a conversation before the other person has come into the room. I have been reading my nephew's letters for 4 months and understanding rather less than half of what is in them, which is unusual because he has written to me every week since he was 9 years old, and I have generally known his mind before he did. Since the spring, I have not. So, I have come down. You are Ambrose Lark's daughter. I am. I remember your father. He was a good agent, and he was rude to me twice, which is twice more than most men manage. She handed the cup across. And you are the young woman who was left standing at St. Brannock in April. I am. And who now sits in the estate office 3 days in the week, and has walked round the sea-wall in the rain in front of the engineer from Bridgewater and 11 working men. 4 days, Thomason said, and it was 111 yards, not 110, and I would sooner be told that to my face than have it counted round me like a rosary. Lady Sabra Ferris put her own cup down. Very well, she said, to your face. My nephew is 32 years old, and he has been alone in that house for 6 years, and he has an overdeveloped conscience, which in a duke is a disease, and he has discovered in the spring that he did an unjust thing at 26, and he is now doing what men of that kind always do, which is to try to buy back a clean conscience with the only currency he has, which is attention. He cannot pay you. You have refused to be paid, so he pays you in hours instead. He gives you the office and the wall and the engineer, and he tells himself it is justice, and perhaps 3 parts of it are. I am concerned with the 4th part. I am not going to insult you by saying he could marry an earl's daughter. He can, and he will not, and I do not care about it as much as you suppose. I am going to say something worse, and I want you to attend to it, because you are clever, and I do not intend to be misunderstood. You came here to clear your father's name. Yes, yes. Then understand what you are doing to it, said Lady Sabra. Every week you sit in that office you are making the vindication cheaper. When it comes, and it will come, there will be a paper at Taunton and a notice in the county press and a great deal of talk, and not one soul between here and Bristol will say that Ambrose Lark was innocent. They will say that his daughter was clever enough to get herself into Wen Head. They will say the papers were got by charm and not by proof. And it will be said for 30 years, and it will be said to your children, and there is no answer to it, because the only proof you could ever offer is your own word, and a woman's word is the one thing in England that has never once been enough. You have refused money because you would not have your father bought. You are at present spending him. That is my objection. It is not a small one, and it is not a kind one, and it is not, I think, one that you have allowed yourself to look at directly. The fire was not lit. The sun came in and lay on the carpet in long shapes. Thomason found that she could not immediately speak, because the woman was right, and she had known it since the day the engineer took his hat off, and she had gone on coming. There is a thing more, Lady Sabra said. I am sure there is. Your young man, Danbury. He is not mine. No, he never was, and I doubt he ever intended to be, and I am about to be unkind, and I would rather you heard it in this room than in a shop. Lady Sabra folded her hands. My nephew wrote to the commissioners at Taunton for the lodged copy of the survey on the 11th of March. The request went through the estate office. Old Danbury has kept the books at Wen Head since your father was put out, and old Danbury saw that letter go. He waited 5 weeks to learn whether the commissioners would answer it. They answered it on the 18th of April, and on the night of the 21st he put his son on the Bristol road with the trunks. Do you imagine that boy found his courage on his wedding morning? He was got out of the way. A promised woman is nothing at law. A wife is a great deal. If you had been married to a Danbury on the 22nd of April, then every claim your family could ever bring on the Barrow Sands account would have been tangled in the family of the man who took the money, and the whole thing would have been unpickable for 20 years. He did not leave you because he was faithless. He left you because you had become dangerous, and you had become dangerous because my nephew wrote a letter." Thomasin sat with the untouched tea going cold in her hand. "Dad, you are telling me," she said slowly, "that he cost me my wedding. I am telling you that he cost you the man, and I am not sure the man was any loss, and I am quite sure that being told so does not help." Lady Sabra's voice did not soften, but it did drop. "I am telling you it because you would have found it out in a witness box in front of a room full of strangers, and I would not have that, even for you. You may hate me for the rest of it. Not for that." Thomasin set the cup down. It rang on the saucer because her hand was not steady, and she let it, and she did not apologize for it. "May I ask you a question?" she said. "You may. 6 years ago, I wrote a letter to your nephew. 6 pages. He was 26, and he had held the title 4 months, and he has told me that it was put in front of him with an account attached to it, and that he was advised that a reply would encourage the girl." Lady Sabra Ferrers said nothing. "He would not tell me who advised him," Thomasin said. "He is very careful about names, your nephew. It has taken me until this minute, sitting in this room, to understand that he was not protecting a steward." The old woman's hand on the arm of the chair closed slowly and did not open again. "He was 9 years old when I began writing to him every week," she said at last. "He had nobody else. When he came into it at 26, he could not sleep and he could not eat, and he had 100 decisions a day put in front of him, and I took 30 of them off him, and one of those 30 was a letter from a girl in a fishing village that I did not read past the 2nd page. "You did not read it. I did not read it," said Lady Sabra Ferrers. "I have been very careful in my life not to read things that would make me act." Thomasin stood up. "Sit down, Miss Lark. I have not finished." "You have," Thomasin said. "You have said that I am spending my father. You are right, and I shall stop. And I shall stop today, and you will find that I am quicker at it than you expected, because I was raised to be. But you will not tell me again that a woman's word has never once been enough in England, because you had a girl's 6 pages in your hand and her word in it, and it was not your word that failed, it was your reading." She went out through the long, cold hall and past the 40 windows, and down the avenue of limes that her father had planted in the year she was born, and she did not go back to the office for her bonnet, and it stayed on the nail. She wrote to him that night, and it was 4 lines long, and she signed it with her whole name. She sent the 600 pages of fair copy up with the pie boy on the Tuesday, wrapped in oiled cloth and tied with tape, which she did not think about until she had already done it. She kept nothing back. Everything he needed was in it, and it was legible, and there was nothing in the world left for her to be necessary about. Then she went back to the mending and the fish and the 1/4 acre of potatoes. She had not expected it to be difficult, and it was not difficult in the way she had prepared for. She had prepared for missing the office. What she had not prepared for was 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock arrived every single day with the light going long over the marsh, and she found that she had spent an entire summer training herself to be somewhere at 4 o'clock, telling a slow, stupid, clever man what she had found, and now she stood in a fish shed at 4 o'clock with her hands full of herring and nowhere at all to put the day. On the 11th of those days, she walked up to the churchyard. She went in the evening when there was nobody about, because she had grown tired of being looked at in Wexholt, and she went the long way round, by the yew at the top of the lane where the 6 men had stood. The grave was where it was. The low curb round it had been broken since the 2nd winter, and the broken piece had been squared and set back and mortared in. The moss was off the face of the stone, and the stone did not say what it had said. Ambrose Lark, and the dates, and under them a 2nd line cut deep and new and pale against the weathered part. Land agent of this parish 19 years. Thomasin stood in front of it for a long time in the failing light. She went home and asked her mother, and Honora looked at her for a moment and said that she had not done it, and had never had the money to do it with, and that she had noticed it herself in the spring and had supposed it was the parish, and that she had said nothing to anybody because she had been afraid of being told it was an error and having it cut off again. Neither of them raised it a second time. There was a great deal happening that year. That is how such things go by. She did not write again. She had said what she had to say. Neither did he, and she understood exactly why, because she had spent 19 days being furious about a promise she herself had made him give. On the 20th day, Osric Pye came down the lane at a speed no man of 71 should attempt. "They are sitting," he said, "at the house today. The magistrate has come from Bridgewater, and the commissioner's man has come from Taunton, and Danbury the elder is sent for, and it is all in the estate office, and the door is open to the yard, and there are 30 men in that yard already." Honora Lark was on her feet before he had finished. "Get your coat," she said. They went up in the pie cart. Thomason did not speak the whole way. There were more than 30 men in the yard. There were nearer 100, and there were women too. And the estate office door stood open into the yard the way a court door stands open, and it had been done that way on purpose, and she knew whose purpose. She did not go in. She stopped at the back, by the water butt at the wall, where she could hear and not be seen. And her mother stood beside her and took her arm and held on to it hard. She heard the whole of it from out there in the yard. She heard the commissioner's man read the lodged survey and the Wen Head survey and give the difference in yards. She heard the receipt read out and the date and the name on it, and she heard the sound that 100 people make when a name they have known all their lives goes past them in a new shape. She heard old Danbury say 3 things and then stop saying anything. And at the end she heard the Duke of Calvern speak, and he spoke from just inside that open door, so that the yard got it as clearly as the room did. "6 years ago in this office," he said, "on my authority and in my name a man was dismissed for a theft that another man committed. He was not tried, and because he was not tried he was never acquitted, and he died in the March following without his character. That was done here. It will be undone here, out loud, in front of this parish, and not by letter. His name was Ambrose Lark. He was land agent to this estate for 19 years. He was an honest servant, and a better one than the house deserved, and every word said against him was false, and the fault of it is mine, because the proof was in my hand at 26 years old, in a letter I did not read twice." Thomason stood at the water butt with her mother's fingers going white on her arm. "There will be a notice in the county paper on Friday," the Duke said. "It will be in those words. I have written it myself and I will sign it." Then somebody in the yard shouted her father's name, and then a good many people did, and Honora Lark made a small sound and put her head down on her daughter's shoulder, and Thomason stood in the sun by the water butt and held her mother up and did not go in. They walked home. They would not take the cart. They walked the whole 4 miles by the high road because Honora said she wanted the length of it, and they got in at 9, and Thomason sat up until 2. He came on the Thursday. She was out on the Grindle. It was low water, and she was walking the causeway to the mussel beds with a basket in her father's coat, and she was halfway across the flats when she saw a man on the far end of the stone, standing, not coming on. The gray horse was up on the bank behind him, with its reins over a post. She walked out to him. She was not going to stop, and she was not going to turn round, so there was nothing else to do. "Miss Lark, your grace." "No," he said. "Not on a causeway. Not after this week." "Then why have you come?" "To tell you 3 things, and to go home," said the Duke of Calvern. "The first is that the notice is in Friday's paper, and I have sent your mother a copy of the proof, the whole of it, so that she has it in the house and does not have to ask anybody for it ever again. The second is that the office at Wen Head is standing empty, and I am not going to fill it, and that is my own business and no part of yours. The third is that my aunt has told me what she said to you in the winter parlor. All of it. All of it." She told me herself, which I did not expect. And I have come out here to tell you that she was right about the largest part of it. And I have known she was right since long before she came down from London, and that it was the reason I gave you my word in your father's office in June. The water was coming back over the flats behind him, quiet, and without any edge to it the way it does there. I am not here to make you an offer, he said. I gave you my word, and I will not be the kind of man who gives a woman his word and then explains to her why it does not count. I have not come to ask you for anything at all. I came to tell you that the thing is finished, and that you never have to come up that avenue again, and that if you do not, I will not write, and I will not send, and I will not stand about in lanes. That is a very complete piece of work, Thomason said. You have left me nothing to answer. Yes, you have made yourself perfectly safe. Yes, he said, that was rather the idea. And you rode 4 miles and stood on a wet causeway for the best part of an hour to do it. He did not answer that. Thomason put the basket down on the stone. I want to tell you what I have understood, she said, and I would be obliged if you did not help me with it, because it has taken me 19 days and I shall lose it if I am interrupted. When I was 17, I decided what money was. I decided it standing by a hole in the ground, watching 6 men at the top of a lane. Money is the thing that is sent down the lane instead of the man. I have believed that for 6 years, and I have been proud of it, and it has kept me poor and it has kept me upright, and I would not give it back. But I made it into the whole world. I thought I had refused money. I had not. I had refused being left at the top of a lane. Those are not the same thing, and I did not know it until the summer. And I did not know it until a man crossed the grindle in the dark at 6 in the morning because he could not wait for daylight, and drank out of a broken cup and turned the crack away from the room, and came down the lane every single time. Every time, even the time it would have been very much easier not to. So, you have your word, and I am not going to release you from it, because you would not take it if I did. I shall have to do it myself. The tide came on over the stone at the far end, and neither of them looked at it. Thomason, he said, you may ask me now. The Duke of Calvern stood on the grindle in the last of the low water, and he did not move toward her. I have thought about how to do this, he said, and I have decided that you will not want it done with feelings, because you have had a great deal said to you this year by people who were feeling a good deal and meaning very little. So I shall do it the other way. You came to that office 52 days. You made 600 pages of fair copy, and you were never once wrong in them. You told an engineer he was mistaken in front of 11 men, and you were right by a yard. You refused the same money twice, 6 years apart in the same room, with nothing in the house. In April, you were left standing in front of 80 people, and you walked back up that aisle and got every one of them over the water and stood in it yourself, until the number was honest. I have counted all of it. I have counted it the way your father taught you, in sets of 10, under my breath, because I did not trust myself not to fool myself. The number is honest. Will you marry me? Thomason Lark stood on the causeway, with the water coming up round the stone. Yes, she said. He crossed the last of the ground between them, and he did not take hold of her. He put out his hand, and she put hers into it, and he looked down at it for a while, at the split knuckles and the salt cracks, and the 2 fingers stained black from 6 years of gutting fish, and he did not say anything about them at all. Then he closed his hand round it and stood there in the rising water in his good boots, and let it come over them both. You will want to move, he said at last. It is coming. I know exactly what it is doing, said Thomason. I have 4 minutes. Then may I have them? Yes. She said. They were married at St. Brannock in the October. The church held 200 that day, which was more than it had ever been asked to hold, and the Willoughbys were in the porch, and the pie boats did not go out. Honora Lark wore gray, and cried from the first word to the last and was not ashamed of it. The curate with the wet mouth had been moved to a parish near Wells, which Thomason thought was probably for the best for everybody. Osric Pye rang the bells. He rang them for 11 minutes, and then he went on ringing them, because the bride was through the door, and he rang them until his arms gave out, and the Willoughby boys had to take the ropes off him, and afterward he said it was the only time in 40 years he had rung a wedding twice, and got the second one right. Praised, Lady Sabra Ferrers came down from London for it. She sat in the second row, in dark red, and her face gave away nothing whatever. She came to Thomason afterward, with a glass in her hand. Duchess, Lady Sabra, I said a number of things to you in the winter parlor. You did. I do not withdraw them, the old woman said. They were all true on the day I said them. I have simply been overtaken, which happens to people who are certain, and it serves them right. She looked into her glass. You were wrong about one thing, however, and I have waited 2 months to say so. You told me it was my reading that failed. It was not. I read the 3rd page. I read as far as the 3rd page, and I put it down because I knew what was on the 4th, and I have been a coward about it for 6 years, and I am too old to be told so by a woman of 23. And yet, here we are. She drank. I shall be difficult, she said. I have no other way of being. But I am on your side of it now, and you will find that is worth having. It was. In the February, a baroness at a house in Bath made a remark about fishwives within earshot of 9 people, and Lady Sabra Ferrers took the woman apart in 4 sentences without once raising her voice, and then did not speak to her again for the rest of her life. She never mentioned it to Thomason. Damaris Kell had it out of a lady's maid within the week, which was how everything in that family was ever learned. There were 2 things Thomason did not know until afterward. The first she found in November in the packet. It had sat on the high shelf behind the flower crock since April, and she had never opened it. She had said not tonight, and then not this week, and then it had simply become a thing on a shelf, the way objects do. She took it down on a wet Tuesday when she was moving her mother's things, and she sat on the floor of the cottage with it in her lap and cut the tape. There were 9 papers in it. 8 were her father's testimonials and articles, and the letter of appointment the old Duke had written in his own hand 25 years before, and she had known they must be somewhere, and had never dared ask. The 9th was a letter, folded, sealed, once and broken open, again addressed to Ambrose Lark, Esquire, land agent, Wen Head, and dated the 6th of May in the year he was dismissed. Sir, I do not believe it. I have read the account 4 times, and I do not believe it. And I am ashamed that I have let 3 weeks go by. I am coming to Wenhead on the 12th. I will hear it from you myself, and I will hear it alone. It was signed, and it had never been sent. Thomason sat on the floor of her mother's cottage for a long time. He had written it, at 26. He had written it, and then somebody had explained to him why he ought not to send it, and he had kept it for 6 years in a drawer, and in April he had put it into a packet with her father's testimonials, and carried it into a church, and left it on a pew for her on the worst morning of her life. Before he had told her one single thing about the survey, or the receipt, or the 6 weeks of work, he had handed her the proof against himself first. He had given her the one document in England that could have made every other one look like a bribe, and he had done it without conditions, and then he had walked out and left her to open it or burn it. She never mentioned it to him, not once in 50 years. It was the only thing she ever kept from him, and she kept it deliberately, because a man who does a thing like that and says nothing has told you exactly how he wishes to be answered. The second thing she learned from Damaris Kell in the kitchen at Wen Head over the making of a pie. You will want to know about the stone, Damaris said. What stone? Your father's. Thomason put down what she was holding. It had his name on it and his dates, and nothing else, the housekeeper said, because your mother could not have anything else cut on it. You could not put land agent on a man they had put out for stealing. Everybody in this parish knew why that stone was bare, and everybody was too kind to say so, which is its own sort of cruelty. It is not bare now, Thomason said slowly. "I went up in the August. It says, 'Land agent of this parish, 19 years, and the curb is mended.' My mother swore she had not done it. We decided it was the parish, and we let it alone, because we were both afraid of asking and being told it was a mistake. Your mother did not have a shilling to do it with, and you know it." Damaris turned the pie round on the board. It was cut in the April. It was cut before the magistrate, and before Taunton, and before the notice, and before any single thing was proved. He came down here on a Sunday when there was nobody about, and stood at that grave in the rain for the best part of an hour. And then he went to Bidgood the mason in Wexholt and paid him. And he told Bidgood that if he ever said who paid, he would never cut another stone on this estate. "Then how do you know?" "Because Bidgood's wife is my sister," said Damaris Kell, "and he told her the same night, and she has held it since the spring, and I have had it out of her since the summer, and I am telling you now, because you have got the whole of that man for the rest of your life, and you ought to know which parts of him he is not going to show you." Thomason went out and stood in the yard for a while. She did not cry, and she did not run, and it was not that kind of feeling. She stood in the yard, where her father had whistled badly for 19 years, and she thought about a man of 32, riding 4 miles in the rain to stand at the grave of somebody he had wronged, on nothing, with no proof, before there was any hope at all of being able to put it right, and paying a mason to be quiet. She did not mention that one either. She only came in that evening, and sat down opposite him by the fire in the office, because they always sat in the office, and never in the drawing-room, and she looked at him until he put the book down. "What?" he said. "Nothing," said Thomason. "You have got ink on your face. The office at Ven Head has a north window that looks over the marsh, and a long desk under it, and a nail in the wall for a bonnet." She was land agent to the Calvern estate for 31 years. There was a good deal said about it at first in the county and in London, and rather less after the winter, that Barrow Sands took the sea and held it, and none at all after the second seawall, which was set on the lodged line to the inch, and has not moved since. The brass compass sits in its wooden cradle in the middle of that desk, square to the edge, the way he set it. Nobody has ever mended the lid. It is not for mending. Sometimes when the work is done and the tide is right, she walks out onto the grindle at low water and goes as far as the middle, where the stone is oldest and the mussel beds start, and she stands and looks back at the flats. And she counts, in sets of 10, under her breath the way she was taught, so that the number stays honest. It always is.